particularly around integration. So all of these companies are working on solutions that need to scale, but scale is the problem because the way that you integrate a widget or a module with ESPN can be quite different to the way you do it with NBC or Yahoo or Bleacher or whoever it is. And so at the end of the day, it's still the content that's king. With the bigger enterprise customers, they'll just say, we still just want the content, the data. We'll figure out how to visualize it because we want it to be unique to us. So don't even worry about that. And that's an okay deal, but at the end of the day, it's not capturing the full value chain, and you can still only charge a certain price for it, given, it's clearly not exclusive to them. You still want to be able to repurpose it and sell it to as many media companies as you can. But on the other side, there's a real understanding now that beyond the big four, the big five in the US, the Bleachers and the ESPNs of the world, there's a lot of middle tier companies. There's a lot of regional broadcasters. There's a lot of startups that want to do more in that space with that data, but don't necessarily have the time or the resources to do it. So there's still a pretty sizable opportunity to come up with those scalable front end fan engagement experiences and sell it to these guys. Maybe you can personalize it a little bit and change the color and add your brand and put a sponsor in it or whatever you want to try and make your money back. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people, that they want to sell the same product to. And so in that instance, it's thinking about, how do you get ahead of the curve a little bit and think about, if Steph Curry has a 40-point game, what sort of key widgets and editorial, mastheads can I come up with and hand over to these guys straight away without them having to ask for it and be able to make money each time I provide that, that head-to-head or that player performance widget. And this is kind of where a lot of the larger companies are at the moment is trying to crack that middle tier of media company that doesn't necessarily want to resource this thing themselves. And I'd say it's still very much a work in progress. I wouldn't say it's rivers of gold yet, but I do think if you can personalize it and automate it enough so you don't have to have a team of curators or producers or journalists working around the clock to manage the inflow of that content and figure out what to do with it, it will and it can be quite lucrative. But the single biggest challenge with all of that is integration, because every one of these media companies is running a different tech stack on a different platform with different ways of having to do the integration. So there's still a bottleneck whereby at the moment you're having to supply those modules, those widgets, those tournament centers, those match centers to someone within the business, and then they have to figure out, okay, I want to attach that Steph Curry performance module to the story, the 400-word story I just wrote on Steph Curry's performance for the Warriors tonight. So it's still a bit clunky. Again, it's getting better by the day. It's still a big opportunity. But there's also a realization that media companies just won't pay the same sort of money for these more complex, more intricate products and services than what the betting operators have traditionally bought for a much lower price in the past. So companies like Radar are right in the middle of really trying to think through their strategy about, do I go for broke and come up with some very custom modules and try and charge certain media companies a premium for it because it is automated and it is personalized, or do I just try to keep creating quite run-of-the-mill stuff that still requires quite a big human touch on the part of the customer or the media publisher to actually deal with it? I'd say we're definitely sort of 3 to 5 years away from cracking the nut there, so to speak, in terms of what's going to work for what price point.
Mhm. No, I understand that, and then when you guys were thinking through all this, you were sort of competing directly with Stats in some sense, right? Because they sort of had the larger media hold.
Yeah, for sure. Stats, until Sport Radar decided to go hard on the North American market, Stats was the big player when it came to official data rights and other content rights for that matter in the North American, particularly the US market. So up until 3-4 years ago, Stats had the official rights to NBA, they had NFL, they had NHL, and they had MLB. So I'm pretty sure back even 4 or 5 years ago, they had the big four, so to speak, in the US. And then, Radar signals intentions by doing a 4 or 5 year deal with NFL, double down on that by acquiring a business called Sports Data in Minneapolis, who had some limited NHL rights. So then they had the NHL piece. And then they went big, as you guys would know from the public reports on the NBA deal. And so the only one they don't have of the big four now is MLB, which is up for tender at the moment, and Stats has held that for a lot of years. But, you know, the Radar really decimated the official business of Stats to the point where, you know, Stats kind of had to pivot a fair bit once they recalled the fact they were no longer the big boys on the block, and sort of have, I guess, pivoted a little bit and now seem to focus their attention much more on, you know, partly unofficial data collection, but more around the player performance, team performance analysis, products and trackers, and seem to have shied away so much about going hard on official data rights from a media perspective, to the point where they don't even really rate a mention in these processes these days. You've got, you know, a stock 3, 4, 5 companies that play with the big checks, and the rest of them, you know, kind of deal with niche offerings around, you know, player performance analytics and team, you know, team tools and all this sort of thing. So, you know, there's been quite a shift in the market in the last 4 or 5 years, that's for sure.
And do you think that I mean, clearly Sports Radar has seen the value in competing for these official, you know, data, I guess, licensing agreements. Yeah. My understanding is they're quite expensive, and if you haven't come up with ways, you know, if it's difficult to tell what's the best way to monetize some of this additional data outside of the traditional means at this point, do you think that you can make your money back from an investment perspective?
Not yet on the media side is the short answer. So, you know, they did the NFL deal. That was really it wasn't overly costly by global standards, and it was really to signal their intentions that they wanted to be a serious player in the media space in the North American market. They then kind of got a bit of white line fever and realized they needed to go harder, because in order to get a media company to integrate, it's not enough to have one sport, one data set, because for a media company to do that integration work, even if it's just for the feeds, requires a lot of time and effort, and you don't want to be using, you know, 5 different suppliers for 5 different sports. That just gets too costly. So they then went and, you know, got the NHL, got and then the NBA, which was the big sort of $250 million deal. And so it's cost them a lot of money to be, you know, it's loss leading. There's absolutely no question that that's loss leading at this point in time. They obviously also saw it from a betting strategy standpoint. Everyone's known for some time that the US was probably going to regulate, which is more of a question of when PASPA would be repealed. But, you know, there's a lot of people, you know, pardon the pun, but making big bets that it would happen sooner rather than later. And obviously it's allowed Sport Radar, through its media links and its big federation deals, to have a pretty decent footprint already in the US and be one of the, I guess, the early adopters and the first movers there, based on these big money deals that they've done, you know, with the NFLs and the NBAs of the world. But there's no way from a media standpoint, and it's important to denote that from a media standpoint, that they are making profit on this. But if you take the big NBA deal, keep in mind that the media component was important, but the stuff that really washes its face in that NBA deal is the betting, and that kind of covers over some of the losses on the media side. And you know, NBA, to its credit, through Adam Silver, was very forthright and very pioneering in wanting to go after the betting piece, to the point where they have a small investment in the US part of the Sport Radar business. And so for them, you know, there was a lot to be gained by doing that tie up with Radar. But yeah, to be very clear on your question, the media side is not yet profitable.
Got it. Okay. No, that's okay.
And again, I think this is why you're seeing that the big companies that are bidding for the data rights and the live streaming rights, pretty much all of them have a large betting component attached to their business, because it's the only way to make some of these business models make sense.
Right. And on that point, I mean, I've heard, it seems like, well, maybe you can help me understand. So for the NBA, for instance, does that mean that if people want to, you know, have data in their system that is around basketball for betting purposes, they would really only buy from Sport Radar because of the fact that they have the official agreement? Or can they still scrape data